Wired Unplugged.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Wired Unplugged, episode 12. Do I always have to check that number? Yes, I do. Where's Aaron, I hear you ask? He's got COVID, everybody. I'm really sorry about that. This is going to be a bit of a shorter episode this week because it's just me. I have recorded a fantastic interview with the lovely people at Luminawesome Games who launched Lumote the Mastermote Chronicles on April 21st. And that interview segment is to come. I was thinking I'd just do an intro and then kick straight into it. But in the meantime, I thought I'd speed run a little, I'll give you a little taster of what the episode could have been if COVID hadn't got its claws into a lot of the people who went to PAX East. So the good news is we did go to PAX East as promised. Last week's podcast was the panel live. There wasn't just a panel going on, though. There was games that were playable there on the show floor. There was a lot of the Wire team there, and there was a lot of people there. And as, no surprise to anybody, quite a few people got COVID. I've been a bit unwell this week, but it wasn't COVID. So Aaron, unfortunately, is not here. I'll try and rattle through. I guess that was kind of the propaganda segment. But I'll just do the headlines, and then there's some acquisitions, and then we'll get into it. So let me just run rhythm.
News we stole from Google.
This time, it's news that I just checked out, and I wanted to look at what the most talked about news stories this week were. And there's only two of them. One of them's good. One of them's a bit miserable, to be honest. So, exciting news for Square Enix fans. Final Fantasy 16 is near the end of development after delays. Final Fantasy 16 here, of course, being the 16th game in the Final Fantasy series. What a shock. This one's quite funny because the game's been delayed, but I wanted to just read a quote that made me laugh. The director of this game is the director of the multiplayer game Final Fantasy 14. And he has said this. Final Fantasy 16 aims to integrate the story and the gaming experience into a single-player game. Unlike online, which portrays multiple players simultaneously, Final Fantasy 16 focuses on the individual. This makes the story more immersive. That was the director of Final Fantasy 14 explaining to everybody there the concept of a single-player game. I found that very funny. Next, New York City sues Activision, targeting Bobby Kotick directly. New York City officials allege that Activision CEO Bobby Kotick rushed to secure a takeover bid from Microsoft to escape liability for the misconduct at the company. So Bobby Kotick, CEO of Activision, not the most popular person in the world right now, is actually being sued by New York City. Well, it's actually the system that manages pensions, and it's not like, just everybody's got together like that bit in Spider-Man where they unmask Peter Parker and then just don't tell anybody. So that's that. That was like the big news stories. There's two more, but they are also acquisitions. So I wanted to dust off the deals for meals thing, run that before we get into our interview with Arn and Kyle from Luminawesome Games in just a minute. Final segment from me.
Deals for meals, deals for meals, deals for meals, deals for meals.
Yep, it's the segment of the show where we talk about the big acquisitions because lots of people buy lots of people. Well, just to touch on the Bobby Kotick Activision thing, just as a little update for that, for those that don't know, Microsoft bought Activision Blizzard, and it's just come out in the investor stuff this week that the stockholders have all approved the transaction. So it's really going ahead. They would have had the power to stop it, I think, if they wanted to. I don't know. I've only watched Succession once. The big gaming news this week, and it's also the biggest acquisition this week, is that the mighty and monolithic Embracer Group bought, a load of the Western Square Enix developers. Eidos Montreal, Crystal Dynamics, and Square Enix Montreal have been bought by Embracer Group, who are known for owning Koch Media, THQ Nordic, and literally 80 other companies. They bought Eidos Montreal, Crystal Dynamics, and Square Enix Montreal from Square Enix for only $300 million. What are Square doing with the money? spending it on the blockchain, actually. Interesting. More on that when Aaron's back, I'm sure. But the IP that they got were like Tomb Raider, Deus Ex, Thief, Legacy of Kain, and more than 50 other catalogs. But like some of those IP are really big, right? Tomb Raider, humongous. Deus Ex is legendary. Legacy of Kain, a lot of the people who are really into games are like really want a Soul Reaver remake, so that's very good. Interestingly, though, despite all that, Square Enix have chosen to retain a couple of their IP from these studios, so they get to keep Just Cause, Outriders, and Life is Strange. So there we go. That's odd, isn't it? IP being bought and sold on that level for only 300 million, so Square Enix can chuck some money in the blockchain. That's the big acquisition news this week. And that's the end of this very short introductory part of the podcast. Like I say, I don't want to get you too bored of listening to just me, to be completely honest. So I'm going to hand it over to myself again, but in the past, speaking to Arn and Kyle from Luminawesome Games. Now, Luminawesome Games are a small independent video game company with big talent behind the wheel. AAA coders and developers with like 60 years of experience between their belts, something like that. Like, you're going to learn a lot about this. We talk all about oil painting. We talk about Lumote's hidden horror origins, if you want to call it that. We talk about what it's like to code some of the most famous racing games ever made. And that's it. Kyle's calling in from his condo in Mexico, so the audio on his part is a little bit remote. Sorry about that in advance. But here to take it away is myself, Arn and Kyle. Curtis, edit this baby. Let's go.
Wired. Unplugged.
All right. Well, here we are in the interview segment of the podcast. And today, I am joined by Kyle and Arn from Luminawesome Games. There's going to be some applause probably edited in now here, gentlemen. So a big woo! Hey, thank you very much for joining me. We've just given you like a really exciting, fantastic, all true, big up intro just then. But so maybe we should hear in your own words a little bit about yourself. So I think in alphabetical order, could you please introduce yourself? Arn, starting with you.
I'm Arn. I've been making games since '94, so what's that, like a long time? I guess. Sorry, how much of an intro did you want for us?
That's fine. No, that's it. Yeah, okay. And your position at Luminawesome Games might be nice too.
Oh, right, of course. Well, there's four of us, so I mean, all of us wear many hats, but mostly do rendering programming and engine programming, and a bunch of gameplay and a bunch of other stuff.
Programming.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no point being specific, like we're like doing a AAA title or something.
Well, we'll talk more about that in just a few minutes, actually, because I'm sure there is a difference, and it's a great opportunity to ask.
Yeah.
But Kyle, what about yourself?
I started in the industry in 2004, working on Two Human, and eventually in 2009, I was moved out to Vancouver to work in Adfront Games, Arn's company. That's where we met. And on Lumote, I made the art and code.
Okay. Yeah. So for those that don't know, the reason that you're here is because Luminawesome Games just launched Lumo, the Mastermote Chronicles. So there's like the trailer before this podcast segment and things like that. But I ask everybody when they're on here to, in your own words, how would you describe what's like the top line for Lumote, the Mastermote Chronicles by the people who made it? So how would you describe Lumote?
All right.
We're both waiting for the other. I always like to say it's like a cute puzzle platformer with like a focus on the puzzles rather than the platforming, and it's lots of like glowy bits, all inspired by the deep sea creatures at the bottom of the ocean. So lots of fluorescence and bioluminescence and sense of wonder we really wanted to capture.
Okay, that sounds like a very fair and pretty humble explanation of Lumo, to be completely honest. So very good. And
That's the coder in me.
Yeah,
not as connecting with the emotional resonance.
No, that's absolutely fine. So we'll talk about Lumo in some more depth momentarily. We'll touch on the inspirations and the art and things like that. But let's just start right at the beginning of Luminawesome Games specifically, before we talk a little bit about you guys individually. What's the kind of superhero origin story of Luminawesome Games? Could you talk me through a little bit about how the company was formed, how you all met, and things like that?
Yeah, so Luminawesome was actually started by my wife Michelle and I. I turned 30 and said, "Fuck it." Can we swear on this? Fuck
You
it.
can swear on this, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I don't want to work in AAA anymore. And Arn had recently left his company the year before. So, we were still like hanging out all the time and talking about stuff. So I said to Michelle, like, I'm done. Like, let's try and do like our own indie thing. So I spent from February until, I guess, October, prototyping some different game concepts. And then the Unreal 4 came out in the summer at GDC or E3 or something. And so Michelle and I picked that up and started messing with that. And then they did the game jam, their first like game jam. They do that make something Unreal game jam thing. And we made a prototype for Lumo called Bump for that game jam, which was the October Halloween game jam. Mm-hmm. And we made this like weird little, this like little glowy cube, and you hop around in the dark. And at the time, I was actually sitting next to Arn because I was working out of another friend who is now our employer. We were working out of his office, just like extra desk we had. And we were one of the winning game jam games for that. And Arn was like, "Hey, this thing seems pretty cool. Like, maybe we can make something. Like, let's try that." So that was like basically January of the following year. We started on Lumo, and Arn sort of hopped on, and this became like the thing that we spent the last 7 years trying to figure out how to make.
And I was gonna say, so actually there's quite a breadth of experience from the personnel behind it, but Lumo is Luminawesome Games' maiden voyage in a way, and there's been like it's kind of like a 2-stage launch where the game kind of launched, then now it's back with the Mastermote Chronicles. So shall we talk about that before we go into the game itself a little bit, really? And I suppose it's a good opportunity to talk about Wired. How did you meet Wired? I ask everybody this, and maybe you can be the mercy kill that I need, but I'm waiting for the day someone just sends me a really boring reply like, "Oh, it was just an email." But so far, nearly everybody's had like a really interesting story about how they've met Wired. Like it involved like cockroaches or someone's missed their flight. There's always some drama. So I'm interested to know how did you meet Wired and what's the story like?
We might be the boring one.
Yeah, that's tough.
No, this podcast needs to be humbled. So please. Yeah.
So we launched Lumote February 22nd, I think, 2020. So just as the pandemic was becoming a reality,
right?
Michelle and I were actually in Ontario for 6 months. We were filing Lumote separate from Arn, remotely in Ontario, and then we put it out and we went to PAX East in February 28th, I believe.
It was
when
28th, yeah, that's it, yeah.
And then we got in our car and we finished our road trip back to Vancouver by February or by March 14th. And then it was just like everything was locked down. So that was kind of it for Lumo. We put it out on one platform, and we couldn't go to any more expos. And it was just kind of like, okay, well, whatever. This is what it is. We'll idle on it. We started working with Jetpack and our current employer, Arn and I. Michelle works for another company.
Right.
Basically, we just got back, we got jobs, and we just decided, okay, well, we'll just spin on Lumote slowly, work on the ports, do things like that, support it, and, just slowly develop a community because we had nothing else to do. Then I got an email or a message on Discord. So I was on this, on the Discord for this guy, Heine. I don't even know if that's his real name. He just has a Discord, and he was I guess he was an old press guy or something. Michelle met him somewhere at a PAX or something, and anyway, long and short of it is, I've been on his Discord for a while, and he reached out to me directly, and he said, "Hey, I've been following your game for probably since he met Michelle. I have this friend Kevin. He's a producer at this company called Wired. They're looking for titles, and you were like, they asked for 10 titles, and you were like my first or second pick in that list. Do you want to meet with them?" And I was like, sure. I mean, we got nothing to lose, like, at this point. So that was kind of it. It was just like pandemic happened, and like a random contact who I had never spoken to, but just was aware of me because of my relationship. Like of how Michelle had met him through sort of like this like either an indie meetup or PAX or something.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, was following us, and it's pretty. Yeah, it was kind of a bit of a big nothing burger story.
Well, I mean, look, it's my job to try and find the pieces here. So what I will say is that it's quite interesting that you mentioned that there's some sort of build up. Lumote launched February 22nd, 2020, and your plan, I assume, was to do the circuit, right? The convention circuit.
Yeah, we're gonna do some more shows. Maybe go to Europe. Just whatever.
How important do you think that is for like an indie developer as opposed to someone in AAA? Do you think that it's like, or should I rephrase that question to how beneficial do you think it is that conventions are now on the rise? We just mentioned PAX East. That was the last PAX East until just a few weeks ago. How beneficial do you think it will be to indie developers around the world over the next 2 years that in-person events are back? Or on the flip side, do you think that the world's already adapted and digital showcases and things have helped more? Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I think I don't think it's actually possible it's so difficult to get visibility online, and nothing about that has changed. And it's just gotten more difficult. And for me, like, going to those shows, like we did PAX, we did the Indie Mega Booth like 3 or 4 times. And people would come back every year. They're like, "Oh, I remember seeing you the first year." Come back the next year. They see us at different shows. You start developing these like relationships with people, just like people are interested in what you're doing. And like that's how we met. That's how you make all your business contacts. That's how we met Heine. That's how we basically wouldn't have ever, Wired may not have ever even heard of us if it weren't for going to those things. Those things are like critical to getting visibility. That's like I don't remember the name of the group, but there's that indie fund it's sponsored by, it's like Jonathan Blow's group, and there's like a few of those guys in there. And like part of their whole thing, like when you apply for that, is that you have to have a presence, and part of that presence is participating in these shows and stuff, because like they want to invest in people who are invested in turning it into a business, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the one
thing. So for me, I think it's like for the most part, it's not possible unless you're like a unicorn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree with that too. It's like definitely from the finding a way to rise above the noise, especially with so many releases coming out like every day on Steam. It's definitely um it's yeah, you must have it. Like it, even like sort of like at the beginning of like the whole indie thing, you didn't necessarily just being an indie was enough because there was so few, right? Whereas now, there's just so many indie titles that you definitely need a good marketing partner, and going to those shows is a way to get the contacts to be able to achieve that. Because like definitely like part of the reason we're relaunching this with Wired is we did not have a good marketing plan at first, right? Like it was terrible. We didn't break above the noise level to actually make Lumote a success. And with the Wired being a partner now, that it has a definite shot of being able to break above the noise and get visibility and reach. Because like there's actually one other big thing I wanted to say about um, going to shows. It for us was massively invaluable to see people play your game, right? Like even if you don't, as an indie team, go to the bigger shows like PAX or show your game at Indie Mega Booth or whatever, at least do the local shows in your city. Like we took Lumo quite often out to the local meetups, and being able to uh, see people play the game, especially like a puzzle game, right? Like seeing how people think through the puzzles in which you designed gives you so much more um, I guess, ability to make puzzles knowing how they will be played. And it really helped us sort of find the spirit of the design of the game. Like, if we never showed the game, we totally would not have made this game. Like, it would have ended up completely different and devoid of, I guess, like it would have been fun for us, but we wouldn't have found the fun to make it appeal to a lot more than just us.
Well, that's really interesting that, when, it makes total sense that, um, you know, civilians can kind of shape the way that games are. And even to the sense, like if you put out something online for play testers and things like that, that's still not a hyper casual audience in the sense that there's certain people who sign themselves up for these and that can often be know-it-alls. But to see, like, for example, a family stop by a booth and play a game, right? And that sort of thing, you can't really... It seems very organic, I suppose.
Yeah.
So let's
And
talk...
actually, that example there was really eye-opening for us. Like when we saw that we did Comic-Con for kids, and seeing families play Lumo and solving the puzzles together was amazing for us. Like, and it changed how we viewed our own game and like where it would fit and like who it would appeal to, as well as like it changed sort of like how we made the decision process of like where to refine as well, right? Like knowing that um like Lumote itself is like non-gendered. There is no speech in it, so even little kids can sort of like understand it because there isn't like a whole walls of text to read through. Like we even the platforming itself, we specifically made it easier because we wanted to focus on the puzzles, right? So we made the platforming more accessible, but we still have it there to have some element of risk and some element of like feeling success, like navigating through the world. But that's not like the main point of it. And sort of all of the decisions of sort of how we refined that balance between like the puzzle mechanics versus the platforming mechanics was really informed by seeing people play it, as well as like children with their parents.
That's fantastic. And yeah, I guess, I don't know, completely validates how I feel about conventions anyway, that there's some sort of chaos to it all and you can shape that. Because you might have had an idea of who the demographic was for a game or something, but then it's not until it's out there with thousands of people walking past and to seeing where the magnetism lies and who stops by, I suppose. So let's discuss then the ever changing form of of Lumo and things like that. You say it started off as a game jam, and I suppose that there's probably core mechanical concepts in place there. So I guess it would be interesting to talk about how you went from changing this idea that was, I assume, fairly mechanically similar to how the game is at its current state, but conceptually probably a long way away, and specifically with regards to like the bioluminescent, almost like sea creature-esque aesthetic. So I think you'll both have answers that will be, fairly different in this. But I'd like to kind of understand where your inspiration lay when it came to thinking about how you would change this little glow in the dark cube to what is now Lumo. How did you approach that? Was it a decision all individually? You threw the ideas in, or was it driven by one in particular person at Luminawesome? Could you tell me a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, I mean, from the game jam to what we've put out now, actually one of the few things that's, I mean, the game jam obviously being made in just like 48 hours or whatever,
Right.
has like a limited scope.
Yeah.
I mean, arguably the thing that is still the same is stuff is still sort of like glowing. That's like probably when you play it, that would be like, if you were to compare them, that would be the thing that stands out the most as being the same, is like the colors. The specific color choices I had made when we were doing that are kind of just all still in there. As far as like the mechanic of the game jam really revolved around this like much more precision platforming, and really just standing on switches. So I mean, we still have those two concepts still kind of exist, but go ahead, Arn.
Oh, it was just there was one other core mechanic, was that when you jump and you land, you would emit a burst of light, which lit up the. However, so that allowed you to see, so you could actually navigate, right? And then that light would slowly fade away. But by actually jumping to create the light burst, that is also what attracted the enemies, right? So it was more frantic, and it was actually, you had far less visibility into what you were doing because the light would slowly fade. So you would you would have to do precision jumping in the darkness, and then when you hit the burst of light, then you could see where your next precision jumps had to be, but now you were under pressure from the enemies that were trying to rush you. So it was a lot less puzzle and a lot more platformer, and in some ways a lot more horror, because you're just left in darkness to think, right? So that essence of the game was the part of the gems that persisted out of that was like the color choices and the glowiness, as well as the you sort of being the small creature in the world, right? And then that concept kind of threaded through, but then the balance of sort of all the other knobs shifted a lot. Like, we lost many of the sort of frantic, in some ways horror elements out of it as we went, and became much more cute, I guess, as we went.
Actually, there were two creatures in that. Creatures, I use the term lightly because they were just different colored cubes, but there were two creatures in that, and one of them chased you, and the other one is actually the guard. Like, we actually still have that exact concept, like that exact mechanic exists, relatively unchanged, other than the size of it. It went from being just like 1 meter to, I don't know, it's like 5 by 5 by 5 meters now. It's like a much larger object, but aside from that, so I mean, I guess you could say 50% of the mechanics were kept in a way.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the core of things stay, relatively intact, and the center does hold a lot of the time. But so when it came to like turning it into like, an idea that wasn't 48 hours in a box, what were the biggest inspirations for you for Lumote then? Was it like the outside world? Was it other games? And if so, can you give me some examples?
I don't really know where we source. I mean, it has like one thing that I always kind of fell back on was Portal. Like it has that. It's even though there's no portals, it has that structure.
Yeah.
As like a 3D puzzle platformer. There's not really and you kind of like go from you solve a room and pass to the next room, and that sort of structure, and even the light wires and stuff and the laser beam are mechanics that I just like hoisted straight out of playing Portal.
And do you have a similar, or is at any point in the way you were inspired by anything from an outside source?
Well, in terms of like the lighting, a lot of that, the initial inspiration for like all the fluorescence and stuff actually came from like black light at parties and stuff. So,
right.
like, all of us also like DJ, and so like we throw shows as well.
Oh, really?
So the all that sort of like lighting design that's almost like kind of all glowy.
Yeah,
was something we totally want to incorporate into the game itself as well, to also make it feel a bit like otherworldly. Right?
That's really interesting. The DJ aspect's funny. What is there a specific like type of subgenre or anything that you are very into at the moment? Musically?
Techno.
Of course. Right, okay. The lights should have gave it away.
I started like DJing in '98, and back then it was like trance, but I was mostly techno is what I played. But
yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. Like the DJ culture here in the UK is a lot more like broken beat, the purists, stuff like that, like garage and things like that. But there's a lot of that, and a lot of like, I don't know, trance still exists, I suppose, but a lot of the trance synths have just been put on top of an 808 now and used in like really hard like trap sounding beats and stuff. So that's really interesting. That's really interesting. That's the sort of thing that I'm really into in my spare time too. So that's very nice. But yeah, I found that with Lumote there's lots of like really interesting little decisions that have been made throughout the game. But one, I'm sure there's a story behind this, and I'm just really curious as to know what the story is behind the Lumo crochet pattern that's freely available on your site. What's the story behind that?
So Michelle and I were, I don't know, we were on our second or third year of thinking we were going to be done Lumo, and it was the winter, and we were looking for a new hobby that didn't involve like staring at a computer all the time. So we started playing with like crocheting stuff. I made some hats and things like that. And then the year before we launched, so 2019, we had done a bunch of shows already. People had kept asking for plushies, and we didn't really want to. I mean, aside from the cost to have them made, for the most part, they just become junk, right? People like they go in a box somewhere, and then eventually people are like doing a purge and they throw them away. So it just seemed like kind of a waste. And so we were entertaining this idea of getting a crochet pattern made. There was a couple of YouTubers that we were watching, learning how to crochet, like different techniques and stuff like that, and reached out to a couple of them to see if they would do it for us. Turned out to be like, I don't know what they thought. I think they thought we were some big company or something, because like we were getting quotes for like tens of thousands of dollars for work that, I mean, they deserve to make like a few grand, but like, I mean, in the end, Michelle made that pattern. She actually made two patterns. There's the big one and the small one. She made both those patterns in a weekend. So that was kind of where it came from. She, so we were looking to make a plushie. We decided if you really want a plushie, then you have to make it yourself. And at the same time, you get to learn a new skill.
Yeah.
Seemed like much more value, like much more of a valuable contribution to the game industry than just like giving away some more like felt or polyester garbage that's just going to end up in a landfill somewhere.
Yeah, very nice.
So I always thought it like worked really well in the sort of like in the domain of making a puzzle game, like, you know, having people sort of like learn things. You know, it's I think it's on theme for what we've made. So yeah, it was just kind of like turned into like a fun way to give people a plushie without having to actually get them made.
Exactly, yeah, make it yourself. But there's also like a puzzle element to it as well, so that's very nice.
So yeah, you can like make them however you want. Like there's lots of people on our Discord make them, and they're like, am I allowed to use these colors? I specifically put that in the pattern, like just use whatever colors you want, like a bright color and a dark color work well. Just like, you know, one person asked if they could, I think they were just like a kid, they were like, is it okay if I name mine? Can I name it? They're just like, yeah, whatever you'd like, right? Like people have much more like, yeah, it's like much more personal to them when they can do that. There's like people who are just like, they've got their entire family making them.
Yeah, that's really cool. Commissioning some grandmother somewhere around winter time. Yeah. That's really, really good. Yeah. I've got one big question, but before that, I'm just taking a lot of liberties with this podcast, and I'm just asking like questions just to satisfy my own curiosity that are completely unrelated to anything. So I've got one for each of you, if you don't mind. Kyle, I'll start with you. You're responsible for the art at Luminawesome. Can you just talk to me a little bit about why? Well, on your website, it mentions oil painting specifically. I wanted to know what is it that drew you to oil painting specifically over any other type of painting? Sorry that this was such an off-the-wall question. I was curious.
There's like a note about oil painting on our website?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Imagine if you said, I've no interest in oil painting. What would I do now?
I mean, I guess that was like 20 years ago now. I don't know. Like I was doing oil painting when I was sort of like right at the end of high school. I was like padding out my my classes with the art credits, and like one of the things was you had to make like 16 pieces or something. And I was just like, all right, well, the oil paint was kind of fun. It's like the textures are neat and like the colors are really bright. It was like, yeah, I don't know. It was just like you're also just like because I'm probably like the psychology behind it is probably like thinking about it now, like 20 years later, it was probably just like, well, all these like great painters were using like oil paints, and I'm just like a teenager, right? And I'm like, well, obviously I have to do like this create this highbrow art. Like, you don't know.
Yeah.
You're just an idiot.
Yeah. Someone's starting their first DJ set on vinyl.
My grandmother was like a great painter, and she always used watercolor and acrylics. Like, it was just that. Part of it was probably just like, yeah, you got to use solvents, man, and you gotta
the prestige. Yeah,
thought it was like the badass thing for an artist to do. You gotta like get it on you, and you gotta use like solvent to get it off.
Thank you very much for satisfying my curiosity, Kyle. I've got one for you.
Who wrote that? I don't even know. That must have been Michelle, or actually, that was Colleen. That was our sister.
Colleen in our bios.
Yeah. Okay. Well. Yeah, maybe have a look for a laugh later. There's all sorts of information about you, Kyle, here. And my question revolves vehicles. You've got a storied history. You're about 35 now. You've been developing games a lot, and a lot of the games attached to the projects that you worked on revolve around like high speed vehicles. Like wherever it's NASCAR, Need for Speed, Little Big Planet karting. But I wanted to know if there was a specific reason. Have you been drawn to that? Like, how does that work with coding vehicles? Or has it just been accumulative? You made one and then it was just easy to get into another? Or are you really passionate about cars? That's my question to you.
It's my favorite genres when growing up, like as a kid, was RPGs and racing. And to me, it's like when I got into games, like professionally in '94, that was right when the PS1 was launching, and RPGs, I guess Western RPGs sort of was like not as popular at that moment, but racing games were definitely still popular. So, and I've always loved racing. I go to track days and stuff when I can. Although it's been a while since my last track day, but that whole I guess motorsport in general, I super love. So like when I got into making games, one of the teams I was on, we were trying to decide what. Well, I was actually part of the tools team as like sort of like my first gig at Radical Entertainment way back, and we as the tools team, we actually also wanted to do a game project, so we were like sort of brainstorming what we could do, and we decided on a racing game, which was actually pretty cool. So we were doing a NASCAR game prototype. Oh yeah, I guess this was a long time ago now. Yeah, that was like '97, and then Radical kind of like somewhat collapsed. Like they hit their first sort of like road bump, and then we had left and started Black Box Games. There was 12 of us that did that, and that was sort of like half of us were the hockey team, and the other half were like this racing team. So when we started Black Box, then we started a hockey project, and then we started down doing a racing prototype. Luckily, one of the people we were working with ended up going to EA onto the NASCAR team at EA, and then showed the execs there the prototype we did when we were at Radical. And then, I mean, we were a free team at that point because we weren't a part of it. So then that's how we got into discussions with EA, and then we ended up doing the next NASCAR game for them. So, and then that sort of like kickstarted our team. Then we became sort of like domain experts in creating racing games from then. So like the core of our team there just, I mean, it's I mean, any team can sort of like adapt to a new genre, like, but definitely how you go about designing it and sort of like how you design the guts of your engine. There's different, like if you specialize into one domain, you can actually like push further than another team that's just sort of coming into it. So that's where we kept pushing hard on that, because a lot of us really liked racing games. I mean, and of course there's like a whole bunch that didn't, but for me that was always like a passion to see how far we could push racing in general. And then that from the NASCAR stuff that we ended up doing the Need for Speed. Specifically, we did the PS2 version for Need for Speed 6, and then from that, then we got bought. So EA bought us at that point, and then that's really when the design for Need for Speed, we pivoted it into urban exotics, because before it was always like Ferraris and Porsches and McLarens and all those sort of like the ones you put posters on your wall as a kid and aspire to. And then we switched it to essentially the urban exotics, and then that's because that was like a lot of us on the team also had those kind of cars, like the whole tuna culture and everything became, and that was sort of like in the DNA of the team, and that was something we also wanted to like push in terms of what the industry actually, because there wasn't at that time. There was Gran Turismo, and it had some of those cars in it. Even though the essence of that game was that entire culture, it didn't really put it into like an arcade racer like we were, and that's sort of the direction that we went. I guess almost in a way like how Fast and the Furious 1 was.
Right, okay, yeah.
But yeah, sorry, I give you like a super long-winded answer, but I guess yeah, the short version is yeah, it's like racing has always been something I love and I still love, and it's and I would love the opportunity to somehow make like a really awesome racing RPG game. But every time we've tried, at least internally, all the ideas just seem kind of dumb. There's still a gem there, but it's yet to be found.
Yeah. I mean, there's more time, more opportunity than ever to, I don't know, find a niche RPG spin. Remember Golf Story did really well for itself just a few years ago. So you never know, your time could be now. I've got I've got one final question for you both, and I suspect that you might have different answers, although I'm sure you'll both agree. Wanted to ask you what the most positive difference you've noticed between working on a AAA title and something as intimate and independent as Lumote. Kyle, caught earlier in the conversation that you were kind of like, I think it's when you swore for the first time. You were like, I'm out of here with the AAA. Well, certainly at that time anyway. So I was wondering, what the major differences you both sort of noticed when you were going from these huge monolithic corps to something this small. Could you tell me a story for that before we wrap it up?
You want me to go first?
Why not? Yeah.
Yeah, just last night. We're working on this patch right now. And yeah, we're trying to get a patch out to fix a few bugs that whatever, there's always bugs. And people on Steam that are playing on all platforms, that turns out everybody's just figured out that Steam is just where you go to get support. So we've got these guys on PlayStation, and that's sort of like besides the point. But basically, you have people that like the game that are just like, hey, I'm stuck here. And you can just say, no problem, send me your save game. Here, try this patch. Okay, we can sort this out, and just like work directly with people. They're more than happy to help you. And then you can turn around and fix for them in just like a couple days. And yeah, you have like this really nice interaction. You make your thing better. They're happy because the game works, and they also feel like they've been heard. It's like really nice. It's a nice way to work. And in AAA, you don't get that. In AAA, like if there's an issue and you're on the forums, you can just see people complaining, and you're like, hey, I just want to respond on this. I just want this thing. And they're like, nope, can't do that. We're just going to ask them to make sure their drivers are updated. And then if they make sure their drivers are up to date, did you try rebooting your computer or like replugging in your monitor, whatever, some boilerplate. And then it's like, oh, if you're still having an issue, then send it to this like support ticket system. And then it just goes off into the ether. Eventually we still get it. And we still fix those things. And we actually, but it's, it's just not as nice. It's not as efficient. And I don't really know what it's actually achieved. It's a really, really disappointing part about like post-launch, sort of the post-launch process on a AAA game. It's just like the inability for you to actually like engage and just like support the people that are like, we're going to get it done either way. It's like, do you want it to take a month, or do you just want it to like take a couple hours and we can chat with this person directly? And it's like,
it's
corporations choose a month.
Yeah, it sounds very bureaucratic. So okay, that's good. A nice direct response to Steam, even with the placements. Awesome. Yeah, and Arn, what have you noticed has been a major difference?
I guess the biggest difference that I guess it's interesting. Kyle totally touches on like the sort of your connection to the audience, and that's definitely something you get much more as an doing indie titles for sure, right? Because basically the communication isn't controlled by an external group. You can control the communication and make the decisions how you want. The other thing, I guess, is also like sort of on the other side, just like how you work and sort of like where you get your satisfaction from. Like on a AAA team, the scope you can achieve is well beyond what you can do on an indie title. Right. Like even if you're doing, unless you're doing like you have like a massive hit like a Stardew Valley or something like that, right? Because then that type of audience you're reaching there is usually just in the domain of AAA, and the stuff that you can achieve in AAA is basically expected to be what pushes the industry forward in terms of like the technical aspects. Not always in design, sometimes in design, but mainly just like in the scope of what you can achieve. And definitely like that has an appeal, but I mean, if you go through that for a while and you're working on like 300-400 person teams and you're so specialized down to just doing like a sliver of the overall experience, it's easy to sort of lose or miss your impact on the overall project, right? Like, and especially like as the different groups on a AAA team, like if you're in rendering and you want to influence design, there's usually a whole political structure that you have to work through to be able to try and even modify a design idea that's obviously wrong. And even vice versa, if the design guys had an opinion on how the rendering should go, there's like it's almost like two walls colliding in like a head-on collision usually, right? Because once the teams get that large, like even if you've got good relationships with everyone, you can't on a team that size, right? Like I found 60-person teams for like the good size. Once you go past that, then that's when politics can really bog stuff down, and then that's sort of when groups become isolationist. You can still achieve like really great games. It's just the personal touch in a way gets lost, right? In terms of the whole thing. And that's like what I find the beauty of indie. It's very similar to like when video games were first starting, where it was like one person could make a game, right? And then you felt complete ownership over it. And like with us on Lumo, with 4 people, it's like all of us have a contribution to all parts, right? So like the level designs, how the puzzles work, how the music sounds, like all of it comes from all of us having a discussion about it, all of us coming together and always getting something better than what the individual could, right? And that's what I really love about like a small team that knows each other and can be honest with each other, and you can always get something better than you could on your own. And that's what I really love about the small team aspect. And that's something that in a AAA project you can get locally within your group, but for project wide, that's almost impossible nowadays.
I didn't actually know what it actually takes to completely make a game.
Yeah, that's totally the other.
Like if when you're working on a project, when you're working on like a big AAA team, you actually like you might have finaled like 15 games in your domain. You have no idea what it takes to actually finish it. You know what it takes to like make a GPU run fast or do this and that. But like, man, even now, like I got to make all these notes about how to like do all the package deployment because patching for each project is different. Like you have no idea. I had no idea what it actually took to final a game on multiple platforms from end to end. Never mind like the amount of work we put into like doing the marketing and stuff. Like those are areas where like when in your AAA, you're just like, yeah, I appreciate that somebody is doing that. But you have no idea how much work it is.
Yeah,
Or
absolutely.
like what it actually, the repercussions of the decisions you make in like one domain and how they what those knock-ons are to another. There's reasons why like you'll when I was a technical artist, and there's lots of just like, we just need some marketing material, so just like to take this type of screenshot and that type of screenshot, and you're like, really, like this is all you want? Like, but until you're actually in that position, it just seems like some of them just kind of seem like stupid choices.
Yeah, right.
But then when you're in those positions and you have to make those choices, you're like, actually, like in the context of this thing, because it's going to be used in this way, like it's fun, like this makes sense. And there's so much of that like you have no idea.
So there's more of an opportunity for a bit of mastery, I suppose.
Yeah, it's like you get to. Yeah, I mean, like I've been doing this for coming up on 18 years now too. Like I didn't know the whole craft.
Yeah. That's a really nice way to end this, guys. And I'd like to say a huge thank you for giving me so much of your time. You've been super generous with that, so I want to say a big thanks.
Wired. Unplugged.
Thank you to Kyle, Arn, and, well, me for the Luminawesome Games interview. Next week, we hope to retain our full strength where my delightful and valiant comrade returns. But yeah, just a bit of a short one for you this week. Sorry about that, everybody. But look, illness waits for no one, doesn't it? We had a really nice time at PAX, so we're looking forward to getting back and giving you all the latest and greatest from Wired. So we'll catch you same time next week where we might have another stream of stories for you. Bye-bye.
Wired. Unplugged.